Hello, welcome to a 781 News special report. In this special report, we'll be discussing the dual language school in Waltham, both what it is and how it's changing, because it has been a very central part of current school committee discussions. And here on the show with us to help us understand the dual language school, first we have Emma, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Emma Zumis. I have two kids at the dual language school. They are in third grades and first grades. Well, finishing, so rising fourth grader and rising second grader.
Very nice, thank you very much. And we also have Jeremy on the show today.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Robitaille, parent of two boys. One student is actually just finishing up seventh grade, so actually someone who attended dual language school and has since moved on to Kennedy Middle School, and also the father of a young man finishing up third grade at dual language school.
Very nice. Yes, thank you both for coming on the show. So, the dual language school, as its name would imply, is a school that has education in two languages, English and Spanish. And it's just a school that is a part of the Waltham public school system. So, the first question, just to have people be acquainted with what the dual language school is. So, how long has Waltham had a dual language school and why did it form?
Yeah, so Waltham Dual Language School was founded in 2016, and was founded on based on kind of an emerging need in the community for a school like that. It is part of the public school system. Um, Parents who wanted their children to be able to take advantage of that opportunity and entered a lottery when their children were entering kindergarten in the public school system. And up to this point, they've had two sections of 20 students each for each grade, with each class comprised of 50% English dominant students and 50% Spanish dominant students. And the way the curriculum is set up is that kindergarten instruction is predominantly is 80% taught in Spanish, 20% in English, and then over the course of the curriculum, that balance slowly kind of reaches an equilibrium where students in third through fifth grade are being taught 50% in Spanish and 50% in English. And so, like I said, they've been they were started in 2016. They have a full K through 5 student body at this point, and they're a they've just had finished a second year of having a cohort of students at Kennedy Middle School.
Oh, very nice. With that core of students at Kennedy Middle School being like the alumni of the dual language school, Kennedy is where they all go once they graduate from the dual language school in fifth grade.
Currently, yes. Like I said, I mean, my son who's just wrapping up seventh grade, he's actually the lead class. He's sort of the trailblazer, and so we're just finishing up the second year of a cohort at Kennedy, where those students they're kind of all in the same cluster, but they're in a cluster with students from throughout from throughout Waltham, or within Kennedy's district, and the dual language students participate in two Spanish language classes, and then the remainder of their curriculum is kind of sort of mainstream with the remainder of students. And so it's been, I think the idea is that eventually the dual language school would likely be a K through 8 school. That has been sort of contemplated. That was when the school was first envisioned. That was the idea. However, with our current location at 510 Moody, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry about that. Due to kind of space constraints, they've opted to have for now sixth, seventh, and then of course next year eighth grade students do sort of this hybrid model at Kennedy Middle School.
Okay. So they're at the dual language school from K through 5, and they gain still a bit of a hybrid dual language education, but only partially 6 through 8 at Kennedy. And you said it's only 20 students per cohort, per like 20 students per year. So it's a very small school at 510.
Sorry, 20 students per class.
Oh,
And then
okay.
they've had like two sections per grade. So they start out with 40 students. Apologies for that.
Okay, no, thank you for the clarification. So 40 students per class or like per year, and you're in a space at 510 Moody Street. And for those who don't know, 510 Moody Street is the small building at the intersection of Moody Street and High Street. And it's actually not owned by the dual language school. This is a building that's owned by the rec department. So can you please describe the space you currently operate in?
Yeah, so the building, like you said, is under the care, custody, and control of the Waltham Rec Department. I think its official name is the Waltham Cultural and Community Center. It's also the former South Junior High School. So for folks who've been in Waltham a long time, it was formerly a school building, and then was surplused, I want to say, in around 2012. Don't quote me on that. And then now is under the care, custody, and control of the Waltham Rec Department. So we are when the school was formed, I think a lot of the leadership came from the superintendent at the time, Dr. Drew Eckelson, and his vision was, I believe, 4 sections per grade, K through 8 school. However, there was no space at the moment at that time. And so as a pilot program, as it started, the space that was available was in 510 Moody. And each year, as a class size was, a grade was added on, we have carved out a little bit more space, a little bit more space, a little bit more space, and at the cost of the other departments or organizations or nonprofits who are there, namely actually Healthy Waltham used to be housed at 510 Moody Street. And so there has definitely been a balance between the needs of the school, right, of a Waltham public school. It is now officially, it is not a program. When it started, it was a program and now was voted to be a school. And so there are different types of regulations and, state board of education type guidelines that we have to follow as a school and not a program, and different accountability to the school department, the school committee of Waltham as a school and not a program. And so over time, as we've grown, the 4 walls of the building only hold so much. So as we've grown, that has meant that other, again, organizations have unfortunately had to leave 510 Moody Street.
I see. And beyond like the pure space constraint of like, not being enough physical space for all of these groups to continue to exist in this building as the dual language school grows, like on a practical level, what is it like on the day-to-day when the dual language school is operating in a building that they do not have control over, that is owned by the rec department?
So I'm not a teacher, right? I'm not in that building every day of the week with the students. I haven't been there to see the challenges come and go. I can only share my perspective as a parent. And what I hear from the teachers, what I hear from the students, there are things like, so it's shared space, right? So for example, we don't have access to the gym every day of the week, right? It was a middle school, right? A junior high school. And so there is a regular old gym that anybody would think of when you think of a gym. But the rec department also uses that for their programming, right? So certain days of the week, we don't have access to it, or certain hours of the day, including for after school programming. We don't have access to that. So we're in a cafeteria. Cafeteria, it used to be a classroom, right? Our cafeteria used to be a classroom. We don't have a playground on the grounds. It used to be, again, a junior high school, and so there wasn't a need for a playground. So a small playground was built at some point for our kindergartners and our first graders that is on the property. However, 2nd grade through 5th grade, they walk over to Gilmore Playground, one of our city playgrounds, which is a fantastic playground. However, you can imagine the logistical challenges of trying to get 40 2nd graders to cross a few busy streets, right, to get over to the playground. And actually in 2nd grade, when my older son was in 2nd grade, the teachers at the time, I don't know if they do this every year, they asked for parent volunteers, right, to come and help out at recess, to just be literally another body to help walk the kids safely from the school to the playground. So those are a couple of things I can think of. Jeremy, I don't know if you have others.
Yeah, I mean, just as far as, I mean, to the playground issue, I mean, it's certainly like again, sort of this is another parent, kind of listening to teachers at meetings, and so not being, not necessarily being there day to day, but the fact that they have to, take a good portion of their student body, off site for recess, it's a strain on resources. They need extra teachers, to help facilitate that, again, for the safety of the children. I mean, there's a really great auditorium on the first floor. Again, not technically part of the school, and I mean, and certainly the rec department, I think, to my understanding, has been very willing to to let the school use it for, like, our spring concerts, things like that. But it's still just kind of like that extra layer of just kind of administration, and just like an added burden to the school and its staff.
Something else that stems from the lack of physical space, because we don't have the physical space to be at capacity with 4 sections per grade. A lot of times in terms of decision making, we're considered half a school, right? We have the student body of half a school, which has implications for staffing purposes. So in particular, I'm thinking about, we don't have an assistant principal. And that often the reason they give is because we're half a school, right? We don't have enough students to merit an assistant principal, which, as Jeremy's talking about, taking students off site, when you have staff who are not full-time, right? There's not coverage often for that body to walk across to the playground, right? Our principal then can't sometimes attend city meetings, district meetings, because there's no one to leave literally in charge of the school. And so the space constraints limit our student population, which limits our ability to advocate for and hire full-time staff often. So a little bit of a jump, but.
Yeah, and Jeremy, you had mentioned that there are only, 2 classes per year. So that's like not a lot of classes for each teacher to teach. Are most of the teachers also part-time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I know a number of the teachers and staff end up kind of getting pulled in a number of different directions, as a result. So, they're having to be, you know, go on recess, but then also having to, in some cases, some will kind of provide support, administrative support to the principal, again, because of a lack of an assistant principal. And then having to really, it seems like that often they kind of have to juggle for, providing, kind of extra resources for students who need, extra attention in reading or math and things like that.
As far as I know, all of the classroom teachers, right, the K-5 teachers themselves, the homeroom teachers, if you will, they're all full-time, right? They have a full-time. It's the specials teachers and the support staff that often end up not being full-time positions, and we often end up sharing, for example, an art teacher, a gym teacher with another school, right? They're a 0.4 FTE with us, right? 0.4 of a full-time job with us and a 0.6 somewhere else, right? Or they only qualify for a 0.6 with us or a 0.8 because we don't have enough students, right? So I think that's often where the part-time comes in. And so that leads to a lot of, it leads to a certain amount of attrition, right? Obviously, a lot of times, especially in today's economy, people are looking for full-time jobs, right? And so if they get an offer somewhere else, even if they are fully committed as they are to the mission of our school, to our students, to the school, so you got to pay your rent and your bills, right? And you need health insurance. And so often the case has happened where they will leave for a full-time position elsewhere, sometimes within the city, within the district, other times not, which is sad. I think, Jeremy, for we both have 3rd graders. They've had like 7 gym teachers at least over their time being at the dual language school, right? So there's a fair amount of turnover.
Yeah, that's a little crazy. That's intense. And as you said, this is a level of attrition that the solution to this attrition is being able to grow, to have a student body population that can justify full-time staff.
I think that's part of it, yeah.
And then just one step backwards, Jeremy, you had mentioned that your kids were admitted to the dual language school through a lottery system. So Emma, I presume it's the same for you. How does that lottery system work? Because you had mentioned that the students that are admitted are a split like 50-50 of Spanish primary speaker and primary English speakers. You mentioned that they, after dual language school, they are just sent into the general student population at Kennedy with a few part-times, but the getting into the dual language school, how does that lottery system work?
Yeah, I mean, I know like when we, when you register your child for kindergarten, you have the option to, to opt in to the dual language lottery, and it's just that, it's a lottery.
Mhm.
But then kind of once you're you have a lottery and they select, you know, the full class size, but then they also retain, I think for the lottery, they also kind of maintain kind of a wait list. And actually, this is relevant to me because actually my son actually did not get initially get into dual language for kindergarten. He went to Stanley is my neighborhood school. But then it actually was something that we were really bummed about. Like we were so excited to learn about the dual language school, and the timing was just right. And actually, a fellow a friend of my son's in the neighborhood got in, and we didn't. We're like, oh no! But then, come late August, I think literally a week before the start of first grade, we got a call saying that the spot opened up, and would you like to opt in? And so we were able to do that. So suffice to say that they do maintain a wait list, and that they will kind of pull from that wait list, for I think I think in order so for someone like my son, we don't speak Spanish at home, and so we were up to that point. He was, he had just been speaking English, kind of transferring in kind of at first grade is fairly easy to do. I think it gets more challenging kind of the further along the students get. But the idea is that, yeah, so they start out 40 students, 20, so 20 English dominant, 20 Spanish dominant, and then as life happens, people move away, you know, some, probably a few instances where students decide not to continue and to return to their neighborhood school. They would, be able to try to kind of fill up a class through the wait list. And so that's how it's operated up to this point.
Very nice. And that wait list, it's available to like anyone who lives in Waltham. And it's a choice between essentially, whatever elementary school you're geographically zoned for, or if you get in dual language school.
Correct. Yeah. Again, if you opted in, yeah, then
Okay.
actually, I guess one additional item is that they also kind of you maintain if you have one child in dual language and you have a younger sibling, that the school that they're able to reserve a spot for that sibling if you want it. So that's kind of how I was able to how my second child was able to get a guaranteed spot, which we opted into. So that's another component of it as well.
Very nice. Thank you. And to round out our listeners' understanding of the dual language school, I figure the most important part is like, presumably the purpose of a dual language school is so that folks both with the English language and Spanish language background can be fluent in both. So to Jeremy or Emma, what are the benefits of a dual language education? Is it purely just to get that bilingual education? Are there other benefits? Like how does this education holistically compare to just going to a standard traditional elementary school?
I cannot sing the praises of our school enough. It was the number one reason that put Waltham on the map for us. We had been living out of state at the time, and my son was in kindergarten at a different school, at a dual language school there. And it was why we came to Waltham, because Waltham had a dual language school. It is not just a bilingual education, it's a bicultural education. And as Jeremy was saying, that 50-50 split of English dominant and Spanish dominant kids who enter in kindergarten is really critical to the mission, not just linguistically, but culturally of the school. The teachers are all fluent in both languages, often are native Spanish speakers coming from different countries, and there is a huge emphasis on, again, the bicultural aspect of it. So we have really robust community engagement around cultural events. That's part of the curriculum, right? They are often talking and celebrating our differences and our heritages, and not just those from Spanish-speaking countries, but from everybody. We have a number of students at the school who have a variety of heritages and backgrounds. And at back to school night, this past fall, in the third grade session, one of the teachers, was commenting on how she didn't have anybody who looked like her as a teacher growing up. And part of why she does this is because it's important for her to be that for kids, right? The next generation. And that messaging that is just really apparent, I think, in everything the school does. And I mean, again, I can't say enough positive things about the school.
I mean, I can kind of piggyback on Emma's perspective. We were attracted to it certainly for kind of that bilingual aspect. I grew up in Maine, and in a town that had a lot of French speaking people. Both my parents actually spoke French before they spoke English. Although through all that, I took years and years of French in school, but never really got to fluent, never really spoke French with my parents. So that was always something that, I kind of had a little bit of regret about, but wanted to, find opportunities for bilingualism for my kids. But certainly like that, the bicultural, the multicultural kind of aspects of the school are very inviting as well. It's a very inclusive, very welcoming, kind of tight knit community, which I think both my boys flourished and really benefited from. I think it's important to kind of to know that there are diversity of people around you, and that you can teach people a lot, and you can learn a lot from people who are different from you. And so I think my boys have gotten that in spades going to the dual language school.
Another point that came up recently in one of the school committee meetings was Dr. Dobles, our principal, and Dr. Hammerla, the multilingual director for the district. We're having a conversation and kind of the distinction between learning a world language, as we often do, as the current curriculum is like in middle school and high school in most schools, versus being bilingual, right? And what an immersion program does. And the teachers will often talk about like this metalinguistic, that the kids in this school, they learn to like switch between the two, right? They take math and Spanish, and then later they'll take it in English, right? And like, it's laying like the neural pathways for these two languages to form, I don't want to say equally, right? Because we know life happens outside the school as well, and some come from households that speak more Spanish, some come from households that speak more English. But in terms of their learning environment, and it's engaging them in a different way than just learning a language does, and that's really implicit again in the dual language curriculum in our school.
So does that make the other subjects more difficult? Like, for example, if you have a student who's taking math in English every year, and then a student who's taking math switching between languages every year, are there different educational outcomes? Is that something that's been researched? Is that a thought that's put into the implementation of a dual language program?
I don't know specifically to answer that exact question. The research that I've seen, again, that has been presented in school committee meetings by our principal and I forget her title, the multilingual director for the district, is that a dual language education closes the achievement gap by middle school. And so actually it shows that like our brains are really amazing, right? And if you give someone the opportunity to learn in the way, in multiple ways, like they're really going to master the material, I think. And especially for those, this is getting a little bit downfield, but when we think about, our standardized testing in this country is obviously in English, right? And we know that English language learners might struggle with some of the standardized testing, but not because of the concepts, but because of the language aspect, right? And so what a great program to like lift everybody up, right?
And I'd say this is more this is more a layperson's kind of perspective, not really more kind of anecdotal, but I think kind of part of the foundation of the curriculum where it is, split 50-50 English dominant, Spanish dominant. Like I think it's like in those there are opportunities where, when the curriculum is in English, kind of the English dominant students can kind of, lend a hand, kind of, help their counterparts. And then vice versa. That, when math's being taught in Spanish, kind of sometimes I think the Spanish dominant, you know, pupils can throw an assist to their English dominant counterparts too. I think there's an element of that as well.
That's a great point. The teacher will sometimes ask for parent volunteers, in various things. And the science teacher has over the past couple of years asked for volunteers. And it is really amazing to see that play out in person, to have the teacher speaking one language and a student isn't understanding exactly what. And so a classmate will step in and do this translation. It's really, and in a very supportive way, it's really amazing. And those are definitely like the soft skills that I want my kids learning, right? And picking up on and knowing how to support each other and do it in a way that the person's going to understand and feel comfortable with.
So I want to share this graph that Emma, you shared in our notes leading up to this meeting. So this sort of like, I guess, goes into what you were saying about the achievement gap. Because narrowing the achievement gap isn't only like, I'm performing the same, but like you can see this in this lower graph when folks are put into these, specifically, I believe Waltham Bilingual School is a two-way dual language school. Like it has outcomes that are higher than like the average monolingual English speaking students. Like, so my interpretation of this graph, and you correct me wrong, is that like the dual language program not only closes the achievement gap, but it kind of like exceeds the standard expected. Is that the correct way to interpret this graph? Or
with this not being my area of like professional study, yes, this is also how I interpret it. And my perception, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is how our principal, Dr. Dobles, talks about it as well.
Right. Yeah. That kind of Tom, to like your earlier question, are there kind of like, challenges given that, math is taught in Spanish, that kind of earlier on that they're, in the lower grades that there could be some challenge, some of those challenges and some of those, maybe some of those gaps, but that over time that they can quote unquote catch up. But then again, according to the data, certainly not an educational professional by any stretch, but they seem to kind of exceed other models.
and then moving forward, so that's what the education at the language school looks like. So with the current issues, we've discussed so far the issues with part-time staffing due to a small school. We've discussed how currently the post-DLS language education sort of like transitions to like hybrid in kindy middle school, and then it's gone by high school. So ideally, what is the post dual language school like learning curriculum? Like what's the goal? You mentioned earlier that it was originally envisioned as a K-8 school. Is that like the ideal way for a dual language school to function? Is that still the goal of where y'all want to be?
I think those are two slightly different questions with possibly different answers. So at the last school committee meeting, actually, again, our principal, Dr. Dobles, and Dr. Sarah Hammerla, they came to present this exact research on this exact question. Should we be a K-5 school or a K-8 school? Because as you said, the original vision was a K-8, but due to space constraints, we couldn't stay. That kind of made the decision for us, right? When Jeremy's older son was ready to go to the next stage, there was no space for them. So they found a place for them at Kennedy and are using more of the strand model, as they call it. According to the research that was presented, for dual language learning, a K-8, a standalone K-8 school seems to be, with the little evidence that's out there, the optimal model. However, you have to think about the context in which you're in, right? We're a fairly small school. What does that transition actually look like? Are the needs of middle schoolers able to be addressed in the same way that those are of a, an elementary school body. And so that's something, that perspective, I think I'm hearing a little bit more about in terms of parent conversations. And I think parents have a variety of opinions on what might be the best. But I think from the research side of like a dual language education, there does seem to be some evidence that a K-8 school is preferred.
And then also, so that's like sort of like dual language school expanding, to teach more grades. But also with this lottery process, is the lottery competitive? Is another goal of the dual language school to not only expand upward, but also expand outward and have bigger, like more admitting more students per grade?
I think similarly, yes. Again, how Dr. Drew Eckelson, the superintendent at the time, envisioned it was a 4 sections per grade, K-8 standalone school. And whether or not that's what actually happens has yet to be determined. But there does seem to be some conversation at the school committee again about, I wouldn't use overcrowding exactly, but just that the neighborhood schools are having to add class sections, right? And if we were able to go to 3 or 4, that could help to offload some of that, those additional resources being needed at the other schools. Based on the numbers in the lottery, there does seem to be enough demand in Waltham to support growing the school.
Very nice. Thank you both for that. I think that gives a very good overview of what the dual language school is, how it operates, and what its needs are. So with that, let's now move into the big current event that's happening. And that current event is that the dual language school is in the process of moving. As we discussed at the beginning, its current location at 510 Moody Street is very small. It's a shared space technically owned by the rec department that has caused it to be that when the dual language school grows, it pushes other groups out. So dual language school needs its own space. And that new space is going to be 617 Lexington Street, which is the location of the current high school before the high school moves to its new location right across the street. So tell us about that. Tell us about that planned move. What's the new space at 617 Lexington Street going to look like?
Well, there have been many meetings, many school committee meetings, various proposals provided by an architect. I'm trying to kind of figure out the layout of what 617 will look like. I would encourage, kind of referencing some of the documents available in various school committee meetings, but kind of an ideal is that there'd be, kind of a specific part of 617 Lexington, kind of all 3 floors that would be, not autonomous, but sort of cordoned off, if you will. So that way it would be kind of like its own independent kind of unit within that larger building. That again, that has been among the proposals. The dual language community, including the school advisory council, had provided some feedback to school committee. Really trying to encourage sort of a space that would allow for all students to be to be in the school without any other outside parties having access without like a key card or something like that. And that that was kind of baked into some of the more recent proposals that again were just proposals, never really voted on by the school committee. And so kind of most recently, the option that was kind of decided upon is that that the dual language school in its current K-5 composition would move to a the first floor of 617 Lexington, of one portion of the larger 617 space.
Yeah, so just to give listeners a visualization of this kind of space that Jeremy is talking about, the current slash old high school building is a very large space, much larger than the dual language schools going to be anytime in the near future. So you're sort of describing, so this green area on the first floor, is this like the determined area of where the dual language school will end up, like this small portion of the high school?
Yeah, so I think with the latest plan that we haven't been privy to, but that I think the interim superintendent presented to the school committee. I think it would be kind of that green section, and I think currently, with K through 5, 2 sections per grade, I think they would occupy the first floor, kind of that green section of the building as is shown on the screen.
And then we're
They-
going from an old high school to a school for K through for kids through K through 5. So they need very different space, right? So like what are the kinds of renovations that are going to have to go on to make this building, this former high school, suitable for the dual language school?
So a very kind of intuitive thing is bathroom space. The bodies of people who are in kindergarten through 5th grade are much smaller than those of people who are in high school, right? And so the bathrooms need to be adapted for their smaller bodies as well. I've heard that just the number of bathrooms might be different a little bit for an elementary school versus a high school. For example, like kindergarten classrooms typically have a bathroom adjoined. Kindergartners are learning their way in the school environment. They may or may not have as good, regulation over their bodies as older people do. And so it's often standard that a kindergarten classroom would have a bathroom adjacent to it. Making sure that there's enough bathrooms to support the staff as well. Again, there might be more teachers per pupil in an elementary school than a high school, and in particular in this part of the building, I think. So the bathrooms are one thing. A playground. A high school doesn't have a playground, and that's usually pretty important for younger people who have a lot more energy to burn throughout the day. So a playground was one of the key components. Like Jeremy mentioned, the security. And then there are things that are just due to the age of the building, right? So an HVAC system, a new HVAC system. Apparently there are zones of the current high school that are either very cold or very hot at different times of the year, and currently does not have air conditioning. And as climate change continues to progress, things are getting warmer. And so having air conditioning would be helpful in the building. And so there are things like that that need to be addressed. I will say, so this floor is part of a larger plan that involves dual language having 4 classes per grade, right? And taking up the 3 levels. And so again, as Jeremy said, we have not seen the plans that they are proposing for the fall for our move, due to the fluid nature of it. We haven't seen exactly where they're planning to put everything. But we feel mostly confident that things will still fit in this green section of the first floor, with maybe needing to take over some additional space. And so that somewhere in there is a cafeteria, I believe, that we have priority use over, and the gym.
Yes.
That's on the right-hand side. And so those are also things that would come with our space.
Yeah, and you will still be sharing the building, I suppose. It's just as opposed to 510 Moody Street, where it's a space constrained sharing situation, where you're sharing with folks that aren't even a part of the school system. This building, you will have more than enough space, and you'll be sharing it with like other school uses, such as like pre-K for the city, and like administrative rooms for like school folks and like teacher trainings and that, right?
Yes, so all the central offices are staying at 617 Lexington Street. There's a long list actually of maybe close to 15 different uses that 617 Lexington will provide, including us in the central offices. And then Next year, Waltham is also launching, it's called Valor High School. It's an overage, under accredited high school program. And so that in this map actually is the orangish color. They will be there as well. And that's a new use of the building.
And then you can also see, you know, so part of it, you see future pre-K, but then there's well, I guess what you don't see actually is where kind of 6th through 8th grade would be. That would be something that is to be determined, actually. So
Future 6th to 8th grade for the dual language school.
correct, yeah, because I mean, so again, you know, various different plans were proposed, and if you kind of go through the, you know, you have K 1st grade there, then you had, I think, yeah, 2nd, 3rd, and then on the 3rd floor was 4th, 5th.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so then arguably there would be future considerations, arguably in this space for 6th through 8th grade, but that's, you know,
Yeah, I see we have
not
a
in the current plan.
labeled potential future expansion. So potential use for
Yeah.
that potential future expansion would be
Right.
expansion of the dual language school.
Yeah.
So that's an overview of the eventual space that the dual language school will have. But currently plans are, and correct me if I'm wrong, plans are to move into this space this fall, like in a span of 3 months. And with that move, it will all be concentrated dual language school on the 1st floor. So explain how that move is going to work on such a short time scale and with such a smaller space than eventually planned.
That's the $1 million question, Tom. Again, we haven't seen the actual plan. So this is all just what we, the assurances that have been made verbally by George Frost, the interim superintendent, mostly him, in his communication about the different contractors with whom he has been in contact, and his then, I have no idea if any legal documents, contracts have been signed between the school department and any of these contractors, but it's all on their word that they can do this in the timeline set forth.
So there is no official plan for how this is going to happen, and you're expected to start the school year at this location in less than 3 months.
I mean, I think there is a plan. It just hasn't been shared. I mean, it was put together, presented by the superintendent to the school committee. They talked an awful lot about it at last week's school committee meeting, but it was not was not shared, wasn't made available to the public, at least as of yet. I mean, I guess maybe that may have changed, but I don't think it's been made available yet.
So there were like 6 big buckets of things that our school and our teachers and the school advisory council that Jeremy can speak more to laid out as kind of the fundamental needs, the core needs of a school, right? Security, bathrooms, HVAC, the playground. Oh, there are 2 more. Transportation is a big one that we haven't touched on yet. And Jeremy, what's the other one? It's escaping me. And so he was tasked. So there was a school committee meeting on May 15th where the school committee voted to move us. And there were a couple of motions to request additional information and make sure that a plan would address, again, the bathrooms, the playground. And so Mr. Frost miraculously somehow went, and over the next 3 weeks between the May 15th, I think, meeting and then the June 5th, created this plan, right? Where he figured out a way, on paper at least, to make all of these things happen by August 27th, when the doors are going to open. And yeah.
And it was predicated upon the plan beginning to roll into motion literally on Saturday. Like tomorrow is the last day of school. Today, where it's June 13th. Tomorrow's 14th is the last day of school, and it's going to be Saturday morning that they were going to have people beginning to go in to prep the place. You know, to start moving furniture out, and then over at 510 Moody start packing things up.
So all of this is, though, it's going to cost money. And I know a big thing that came out of the last school committee meeting is that, Frost said, hey, these are things that need to be done. Here are the costs associated with it. And then there was a bit of pushback from Mayor McCarthy and the school committee on paying those full costs. So of those like buckets of things that need to be met, what currently does the city plan on funding by fall and what don't they? Because I know the big tagline that I heard a lot about is that they don't want to pay for the HVAC repairs by fall. Is that correct?
Yes.
In the sense of, so SMMA, the architects, were tasked with creating a plan for reutilizing 617 Lexington Street, the entire building, not just us, right? We are one component of it that they were asked specifically to include in their plans, but their plans encompass the entire complex. And so that's why you see on some of the slides, right, the plans for the whole building, the whole floor print. However, due to financial constraints, that's not in the cards right now to do the entire building over, right? So as the financial piece has been considered, the plan kind of keeps getting whittled down a little bit. And so their whole shebang of dual language plan in 617 Lexington Street with a potential expansion to K-8 and 4 sections per grade, I believe, is that $37 million number.
Mhm.
However, that was too much. And so then a whittled down plan came up with an abbreviated timeline to move us in for to do the work now, move in January of 25, and that was the $9 million number.
Mhm.
And then quite reasonably, I think, the school community kind of pushed back on that and said that would be very disruptive to move an entire school essentially over the 2-week, winter holiday. That would be very disruptive to the students, to the teachers. And so they put that aside. And then now here we are with this $1.6 million doing it over the summer. The HVAC piece, so I said that all to say, if we were to do the 3 floors of section C, call it that green footprint, by going, that's where it triggers the code violations. By staying on one floor and not touching like the entire HVAC system, from what I understand, does not trigger those code violations, and which is part of the consideration for keeping us on one floor with essentially like mini ducts, right, put in for the HVAC
Right, yeah, heat
solution.
pumps. Right,
Instead
yeah.
of, yeah.
It's very much a temporary solution, one that allows, the school as it's currently comprised to just, up and move with, kind of a minimal, I guess, minimal kind of rehabilitation of the current space.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, so we had this, 37 million need for the full renovation. That's a lot of money. A lot of money. So the short-term plan, what I'm hearing is that for 1.6 million, the city, as opposed to the 3-4 plan that is the eventual goal that we shared earlier, just for this fall in the next 2.5 months, the city is funding $1.6 million to just basically clean up the first floor section of the dual language school, not doing the HVAC upgrades, just plugging some like window units into the building. And that is what's going to enable the dual language school to operate at 617 Lexington Street for the next year. And then come next summer, ideally that's when there's more money and more time to plan future upgrades, but it's basically going to be like renovated in spurts in between school years.
Maybe. I mean,
No one
that
knows.
sounds like a possibility. But also just to say, I mean, as of today, I don't think the city has actually funded it yet. It has been, I mean, I know the mayor or the school committee, however, has requested the appropriation, but I don't believe that it has been funded as of yet.
That is correct. Yeah, it was the request was made by the school committee through the mayor, sent to city council. City council referred it to the finance committee instead of voting on it without committee reference. So it's been delayed voting on. Ideally, in a week they vote on it. Do y'all have any concerns about that, or do you feel pretty confident that once they have time to deliberate, that it'll happen?
I, if this was a multi-year plan, this 2-week delay would not concern me. It feels fairly, I don't want to call it typical or common, but like it's a thing that happens, right? In local government. So correct me, Tom, you might know actually better than I do. After going through the finance committee, it still has to go back to the full council to get voted on and fully appropriated. So it's
Correct.
actually
The
a
finance,
2-week.
correct. Yeah, the finance committee is only 5 people. You need the full city council to vote on the budgetary stuff. So this coming week, finance committee is going to discuss it. That's 1 week delay. And the following week, committee of the whole can vote on it. That's the 2 week delay. Yeah.
Right. So again, if this were a multi-year project, that would not concern me, right? Like you can kind of take that in stride as like that's part of doing business on the local level. However, this is not a multi-year project, right? We have a very short timeline. And from how Mr. Frost at least communicated a lot of this to us was that like there's not much room for, there's no margin of error, right? And so it is very concerning that right off the bat, we have a 2-week delay. What if there's a part missing? Like we've all heard over the past few years about various, parts being on back order and how long it takes to get things. And not only does it make you worry as a parent about just being able to send your kid to school on the first day of school, but also are there then corners that are going to be cut safety wise, right? For some of these issues. And I mean, these are like, I don't think that's actually going to happen, I hope, but you worry, right? As a parent that you're not sending your kid into a safe place just for the sake of like getting things done on time. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds very stressful. Like everything's up in the air, and you're hoping that in a period of 2 months, everything just happens, or 2.5 months, everything just falls into place.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to hope that despite the issue with the appropriation not happening, that they're still that come Saturday that they're starting work as if it has been, and they're just forging ahead because otherwise it could be it couldn't happen. They'll miss the mark, and that's really concerning.
So
Additionally, which is one other thing, in the context of the timing piece, it's July 13th today. July 30th is the last day of our interim superintendent. We have a new superintendent who is starting on July 1st, who is also taking on the massive undertaking of moving our current high school, which has been, I have to say, from what I've been watching from various school committee meetings, it seems very well thought out, right? Like they have, it is really quite fascinating and amazing to watch that process unfold. And so we have a new superintendent who's going to be starting, who's already taking on this massive endeavor. And let's just throw moving an elementary school in at the same time, right? It just feels, it's just an additional variable, I think, that lends itself to a little bit of uncertainty. And this is just the perspective of the parents, never mind the teachers, right? Who found out a couple of weeks ago that at the end of, you have to be packed up and done at the end of this year. And next year you are going to show up to work in a new place that you have not really, I don't want to say they haven't been into, because they were given an opportunity to take a tour a couple of weeks ago. But like, what does that do for them, right? For their feeling of worth and respect from the district. That's also needs to be mentioned, I think.
yeah, so I guess the big question that comes into my mind hearing all of this like stress and like things really running up against the clock and a lot having to happen in a very short period of time. What is the rush for this fall? Like, could it have been an option to like wait to transition the dual language school to 617 Moody Street, 617 Lexington Street? Could that have waited until fall of 2025? So that way there's like a year to go through these renovations instead of like a 2 month like real rush job for the fundamentals. Like what's the reason that we're going this fall instead of giving it a year?
I mean, there are rumors and theories, right?
Mhm.
That I think that again, just rumor and theory. That I mean, I think probably it's not just a being pulled to a building that will now no longer be occupied by the high school. But I think there's also probably just the push probably from the rec department. Again, that's again more kind of rumor than anything, but it makes sense. I think it's a very valuable space for that part of the city. That because dual language has been there, they have, like as Emma mentioned before, some organizations have had to move, and they haven't had the maximum amount of space to be able to provide services. So I suppose that could be a factor. I mean, that's something that hasn't been, publicly kind of presented as sort of a contributing factor, but
It's just a fundamental, like you are in the Rex department space and other groups would like to use that space / have already been
maybe, yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing from this is that like there's no one like pushing from within the dual language school, like, oh, we want to move right now. It's entirely like an external like shove to like, hey, get your ass in gear. Like we need you in this new school.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly, I mean, it's a challenging space, right? Like I mean, it was one thing when, my son went there first day of first grade, and he was, one of, well, it would have been one of 80 students. It was a very different thing when he started his first day of fifth grade, and then he was part of, one of 12 classrooms. And so, uh, and all the issues that Evan and I spoke about earlier. I mean, those are still there, right? And it's and to kind of soldier on for one more year in that space will certainly have its challenges. We'll still be, walking down the street to Gilmore for recess. So that's certainly not, not an ideal for sure, but to be kind of now sitting at the penultimate day of third grade with my youngest, thinking that in 10 weeks time that we'll be sending him on the bus headed for a different school. We think it's a little nerve-wracking, to say the least.
So where to start? Supposedly, the plan has always been to move the dual language school to 617 Lexington Street once the new high school was finished and the current high school transitioned over. However, there have been a lot of things in flux over the past since that conversation started, right? We've been through, I don't know how many superintendents since Drew Eckelson was the superintendent with this plan, right, back in 2016. At the time, we were a small school, right, as Jeremy was just saying. And so the constraints of the physical environment weren't as strong. And then COVID happened, right? Huge disruption. And so there were bigger fish to fry, essentially, than the fate of our school. But for the past 2 to 3 years, I think our school community has really tried to push the school committee to make a decision, right? Because it didn't seem like they had made a decision. There was no plan in place, not just a transition plan, but an interim plan, right? A bridge plan for how are we going to have a healthy, functional school in our current space at 510 Moody until the ultimate location is decided. And so I think as a parent, it feels like a bit of whiplash to hear that all of a sudden, after these years of trying to advocate and have conversations and have dialogue and understand and hear no action from the school committee on a decision about the location, about K-8, about number of sections, to then all of a sudden say, oh, in 2 months, you're moving, after there's been so much inaction. And again, like this communication piece, I think, of like not knowing what they're thinking. So since our cohort kind of parents has gotten involved, there have been a number of times where it has not felt so apparent that we were definitely moving to 617 Lexington Street, including a number of other tangible options being presented to us. The perspective as you're asking about how do we feel about moving versus staying, an extra year and having a full renovation before moving, why is it so rushed? The school community did not want to move in this manner, right? We kind of saw the writing on the wall of it. Ultimately it's going to 617 Lexington, but this does feel rushed and there's a lot of room for error. And so why not wait a year? Which was
So it's the school community who's having this discussion saying like, hey, why not wait a year? We've been pushing for a long time, but hey, no need to do it all at once. Like, come on, give us room to breathe.
that was essentially the position of the school advisory council. Jeremy, I don't know if you want to talk about the letter that you all presented at the last school committee meeting.
I'll give sort of a disclaimer. So I'm a member of that school advisory council. I read this letter at the school committee meeting on behalf of that council. I'm here tonight just as a parent, so just want to have that.
And also, in that case, could you please define for us what exactly the school advisory council is? It's been mentioned a few times, but it would be good to know what is the definition of school advisory council? What is this thing that you are a part of?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a body of parents, teachers, and staff that and they're it's a body that's formed at a school. It kind of abides by I think the DESE, so the Department of Secondary Education in the state have a number of kind of guidelines that this body has to abide by. Publicly announce their meetings. They have public comment period during those meetings. And this is a body that deliberates and assists, provides support to the principal and the administration of the school. The and the being a school advisory council, there is a portion of the standing school committee meeting where you can kind of have a an open forum to communicate to the school committee. And so then we have that committee has done so a few times, sort of express trying to kind of garner the views and feelings of the school community, certainly around sort of like the future location of the school. And then in kind of this most recent meeting, we did try to stress sort of the ongoing concerns that we've been trying to communicate to the school committee about wanting to our future location to have to be its own can't say autonomous but kind of freestanding sort of distinct part of a larger building, so it can really have the feel of a school, but also to establish adequate security, so that way it's since we are sharing ultimately sharing a building with other organizations, that we as parents can feel confident that our children over the course of a school day will not be coming into contact with anyone who isn't a staff member at that school, without proper going through proper channels to enter the building. Wanting to be sure that if the plan is to expand the school, that it's appropriately staffed, that we have that the school committee asks for and the city appropriates sufficient dollars for it. Wanting another piece of it was wanting the renovation, so wanting the heating and cooling systems, the right number of bathrooms, the appropriately sized bathrooms, an age appropriate playground, electrical upgrades, and Wi-Fi. Wanting all that, asking for all that to kind of be in place before we kind of send our kids there. And of course having wanting to have a communication plan, so because you have all students who are getting ready for another year. You have a number of parents of incoming kindergartners who may have just or are about to sign on to joining the dual language school community, and between when they signed up for the lottery and today, it's likely it's going to be a different place. It's going to be a different place. So, does that factor in? And then also having like a fully formed transportation plan, for not only for, busing students there, but also for ensuring that, back to Emma's point about having, we have a predominant number of our student body resides in the South Side for those families who may not have a car. If they have to go pick up a sick kid, if they have to rely on public transportation, how long is that taking? And but I will say, kind of to the superintendent's credit, they have at least at least pulled together at least a piece of a transportation plan. So I will grant that. But anyway, so just kind of this letter sort of enumerates a number of these issues, and and proposes that that if we be in a position where more of those things could be accomplished over the next year, that hey, the dual language school community will kind of we can stick it out one more year, and then be ready to move in a year. But again, that was a letter put together by the council. I happened to read it, but again, me here now talking to you as a parent.
Yeah, but everything you just said was basically a summation of all that was discussed in that letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So all of these issues and concerns have been presented to the school committee. Yeah, so you know with certainty that they are aware of these issues, concerns, and needs from the perspective of the dual language school. So it's just a matter of to what degree they are able to respect and account for those needs.
I will say there's also a perception, and I'm going to be really blunt here. There is a perception, founded or unfounded, that because of who our school serves, being that we are a 50% Spanish speaking community, there is a very real perception that we're not part of the district in the same way, right? That we, that the school committee and the city kind of at large is okay with letting us stay in a building at 510 Moody Street that is really not set up for us, right? That they're okay not having a bridge plan, not having an interim plan, that they're okay kind of putting us in a rushed manner in a place that they're not showing with full confidence is going to be a healthy, safe environment for our kids. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say that that perception does not exist. Again, whether it's real or not, that's huge. A piece that we haven't quite talked about yet is through all this over the past couple of years, it felt like there were some real discussions about questioning if we would actually move to 617 Lexington Street or stay somewhere on the south side, right? So 510 Moody Street is located on the south side of the city, which is our more diverse part of the city, side of the city, and where the majority, I will say, of our students reside. If you look at the data that shows where our students come from, over half of the students would be zoned for Whittemore or Stanley elementary schools. And so while we definitely are a citywide school that serves students from every corner of the city, if we just think about who lives where, and we know that 50% of our incoming kindergartners are Spanish dominant, then they're going to predominantly live on that side of the city. So there was a big fear from parents and staff that this was being done without taking into consideration what that would do for our community. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit later about the ramifications of moving. But I just have to say that part.
You mentioned that this has been a multi-year process, and I know you have done work to systematically get a survey of the entire population of the dual language school to make sure that the needs of the whole population of dual language school is expressed. So can you please share with us the results of that survey, sort of like the needs and concerns of both the Spanish dominant and the English dominant parts of this dual language school?
Sure. So again, going back a little bit, initial plan had been to move the school to 617 Lexington Street, going back to 2016, right? But again, as a number of things have happened over the past few years and there was no action on it. And the situation at 510 Moody was becoming untenable, right? There was more advocacy from the parents about making a decision. Where are we moving? What is the plan, right? There was, at the bottom of all of this, there's no plan. There was no plan, at least that was communicated to us. And honestly, there's still like, isn't really a long-term plan. There's, as Jeremy said, this is a temporary move for us to go to this first floor with minimal renovations. But what is the timeline? Is it another 8 years that we're going to be on the first floor of this, building without some of these bigger things, ability to expand sections and grades, et cetera? So at some point, the door was opened to exploring other possibilities besides 617 Lexington Street. Namely, McDevitt Middle School was put out there. I don't remember exactly by whom, either the mayor or the school committee body. And so there became a conversation around, where do we want to go? And in one of the school committee meetings, someone asked, oh, has anyone surveyed the parents about where they want their school to end up? And the answer was no. So as a good doobie, I made a survey with a few other parents, Jeremy included, and a couple of others. And we did it in both English and Spanish. While I am not a Spanish dominant speaker, I do speak some Spanish, and we have a number of parents who were involved who did have the language skills. And so we created a survey that we sent to everybody in the school in both languages. And we had both paper copies and we did it online. And it was really we didn't want to ask, where do you want the school to be, right? Because if you ask a different set of parents in 5 years where they want the school to be, they might answer differently. And that's not really a way to plan. So instead, we asked about how they make their decisions, where to send their kids to school. And we asked a couple of hypotheticals of, if the school were to move to these two locations at the time, again, McDevitt or 617 Lexington Street, how would that change your decision-making process, right? To send your children to the dual language school. And the results were pretty interesting. From the Spanish-speaking families, we heard overwhelmingly that they wanted to stay closer to the south side where they live. I don't think that would be a surprise, right? So they preferred, for example, the McDevitt location. And they listed a number of concerns that would be barriers to them sending their kids to 617 Lexington Street, transportation being a huge one of them. The responses from the folks who responded in English were a little bit more mixed. A less strong preference for one or the other came out. And so it was really interesting. Those results were presented at a town hall meeting that the school committee put on that did have a Spanish translator present. I gave them credit for that. And again, this perception of the city wanting to move the school away from the community and without proper funding and resources was apparent in some of the responses from the Spanish-speaking respondents in this survey. So there was a lot, but that's the only time that we've really systematically heard from the parents, at least the parent community.
Yeah, and it is worth noting, like, this was not a decision made in vacuum. There are like tons of different choices pulling this eventual decision to either have the dual language school end up at McDevitt or 617 Lexington Street, which 617 Lexington Street was where it ended up. But this is notable, I suppose, where what you had mentioned earlier of like the school committee not necessarily taking the concerns of the dual language school as seriously as the other schools. This was the one instance where you do have like a scientific and representative sample of the Spanish speaking community at the dual language school saying like, hey, we have a preference for McDevitt. And then that wasn't the decision that ended up being made.
And anecdotally, I have heard from parents whose kids were, entered the lottery through the Spanish speaking side saying that they're considering not sending their kids to 617 Lexington, right? Like currently with all of this change, they are currently considering pulling their students and enrolling them in their neighborhood schools, which, speaks to so many issues. one of which being trust and communication, right? There's very little communication that's coming from the district level, like in general, to the families of the dual language school, as Jeremy was saying, right? Kindergartners enrolled thinking they were going to one place, and they are likely to go to a different place. Do they know that this is happening? I have no idea. And also, so it's not much communication is going on, and also it's not happening in Spanish, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of kind of informal communication between parents, and doing, that largely has happened in English speaking circles. And so how are we making sure that everybody in our community has not just information, but timely information, right? To help them make the decisions that are going to be the best for their families. Obviously, the communications that come from our school have been in both languages to families, but that feels different from, broader, more real-time communications. They felt what has come from our school has been very brief, I'll say. I will say the school committee agendas are posted in both English and Spanish, but I don't think the minutes are.
Yeah. And I suppose I have one more question actually before we wrap this up. And that question is, so y'all said that this school was formed based out of a need seen in the community. And this was largely led by the superintendent at the time back in 2016. Did the dual language school purely form out of a vision of this one superintendent who said, like, hey, we have a bunch of Spanish language speakers, we know dual language education is good, let's make a dual language school? Was there any external factors pushing this happen? Was there any grassroots pressure making this happen? Or like how did this eventually coalesce in 20?
Yeah, so I think Drew Eckelson was certainly sort of like a kind of a thrust for it, with his leadership at the time. But there's also, and I'm gonna forget her name, but I think she was a member of the school committee. She had, I think she was, I believe, a doctoral candidate at Brandeis, and this was kind of like a part of her research. I know she was a pretty big factor in why dual language, why this particular model of dual language, and why in Waltham.
I think it was Katie Dowsett.
Thank you. That's
Katie Dowsett,
exactly who it was. Yes, thank you. Indeed. So I know she was definitely a big factor in the creation of the dual language school as well.
Right. That's really good to know, actually, because one admitted assumption that I had is that I had always assumed the dual language school was something that Waltham was forced to create. Because for those who haven't seen the numbers, like Waltham is insanely segregated. Like, the elementary schools in South Waltham go as high as like 90% non-white. So I had always assumed, like, because of that insane level of like intercity segregation, I assumed this was something like, the feds came down and said, like, hey, y'all got to do some sort of integration program. This is very cool to hear, actually, that there are just like really
interesting,
like headstrong folks in Waltham city government and the city community who just said, like, hey, this is a great thing, let's make this happen because it's good, not because we have to. So that's really cool. That sort of just like overrules what had been, I suppose, a bias or assumption that I had.
Which is interesting to think about, because think about where the schools in Waltham currently exist. Stanley, I guess you could argue, or is that South Side, or is that not? I don't know. You all over in Cedarwood are kind of your own area. But there's currently one elementary school in like South Side proper, Whittemore, right? And currently the dual language school is on the South Side. Both middle schools are north of the river and north of Main Street. The high school is north of Main Street, right? However, our South Side is our most densely populated area, right? Schools have been closed. Not just that they didn't exist, but they have been closed in the south side of the city. So what does that do for a large portion of our population, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it goes with what you were saying, the fact that there was the anger and fear and mistrust in the Spanish-speaking community because they felt like, instead of sending their 5-year-olds across the street, they were having to send their 5-year-old to a place which culturally on certain levels like is functionally like a whole different community. which is a big change, right? That's a huge shift from, as y'all said, what they thought they were signing up for and what they have now. But yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on and discussing the dual language school and educating us about it. I will be sure to include links to both the school advisory council letter and Emma's survey in the bio, so you can read for yourself the perspective of, like, school advisory committee for the dual language school expressing their opinions about the upcoming move, and also Emma's report on, like, the full breadth, how the parent population writ large feels about changing locations. Yeah, I think there's only one other thing I want to add. Emma, I'll let you go first.
I was just gonna say, as we wrap up, I don't know if there are any parents of students currently at our school or who are considering our school who are listening to this and weighing this as they make their decisions for currently or in the future enrolling in the school or joining the lottery. But this does not change my perspective on our school. I think a number of the parents are very confident that our teachers are amazing. They are amazing human beings as well as educators, and they are already rising to the occasion given this curveball thrown at them. And they are going to make this experience as best as they possibly can for our kids. And I have all the confidence in the world in them and in our principal and in our school community, right? To make this transition the best we can for our kids. Folks are already talking about, field day, for example, right? Currently, we don't have a place for field day. So we take bus over to Nibbermar, and parents are already talking about generating the excitement about being able to have field day at our own school next year, right? And so I just hope that, this is a big change, a challenge, but I think if anything, it just recommits us and strengthens our resolve to make our school community as good as we can for everybody. If anybody's out there wondering what they may have signed up for next fall.
Jeremy, do you have any closing thoughts or comments?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, I mean, I certainly echo Emma's sentiments that wherever my son's going to the first day of fourth grade, I'll be super proud and being part of the dual language community. So thanks.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. The final point I wanted to make was a bit of a political note, and that's just to say I want everyone watching this to know that there are 7 voting members on the school committee. There are 6 school committee members we elect, and then also the mayor, who is a voting member. And the mayor is like, actually not even arguably, like, definitely the most influential. Like, I've sat to watch a couple of these school committee meetings where the dual language school is discussed, and it is very much the mayor who is, like, driving this conversation, like straight up steamrolling the architects themselves. So that's just to say, like, if you want to like make opinions known or like get involved, or like if you want to know like who's making these decisions, 6 school committee members and then also the mayor, they are the ones driving this. And I don't mean that as like a Swiss way against them. I just want folks to know, like, this is how the bacon's made, and if you want to influence things, those are the people you speak to. But thank you so much, Emma. Thank you so much, Jeremy. This was very informative, and I can't wait for folks to watch this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.